All right, so let's look at refactoring some of these content that we have so far. So one of the first things that we'll need to do is that realize that in the index page, right? We're using these two libraries. Yes, we're using the Angular library and the Angular route library. And as we progress, we're going to be adding several other libraries in here. Right, we're going to add the Bootstrap library in here. We're going to add jQuery in here, text Angular, and quite a few other libraries. Right, and you probably for your project you'll be adding quite a few more libraries, right, to talk to Google or Yelp or Facebook or whatever. Right, you're going to be adding quite a few other libraries. So anything we declare here in our own app.js, any variables or any functions that we declare, right, are all going to be declared in the same namespace. Okay. Notice that right here from our app.js, we were able to use Angular. The reason we can use Angular is that the file before us, all right, declared that variable globally, right? And so if we wouldn't inadvertently would have created another variable called Angular, right, and made it equal to something, we would have inadvertently, destroyed the previous declaration of the Angular object, okay, which is dangerous, right? But it's the nature of how JavaScript is interpreted inside of the browser, right? We all have one single namespace. Newer versions of JavaScript are dealing with this issue, so for us to deal with this of making sure that the namespaces don't override each other, right? We need to deal with this, right? Here we're declaring a function called configuration. What if someone else in some other JavaScript file or library also declares a function called configuration, right? So basically, we don't want to have to compete for the namespace. We want to make sure that anything that we're declaring here is ours, and we're not overriding something that is already declared out there. Make sense? And vice versa. Okay. So to deal with this, we want it to behave exactly the way it's behaving, right? That we are declaring functions, we are declaring applications, modules, and all these variables are viewable and whatnot. So yes, we want to behave the same way as if we are immediately declaring it, but without trampling on the outside namespace. So one of the ways to deal with this is to use the fact that, notice that here in this function, any variables that I declare in this function, right, is opaque to the outside world, right? Only that variable only exists in that function. See that? Right? And nowhere else. Okay. Also, if I declare other functions in here, okay, that function only exists inside of this function. Is not accessible from the outside world. Nobody can call this function, right? Only if you're inside of the function you can call this function. Yes, right? So we do have a mechanism to deal with this, right? To hide things, right? We don't have, like in other languages, ways of making things private or public or protected and things like that, right? So to deal with this issue, what we're going to do is that we're going to declare everything in a function. Okay, so everything is now inside of a function. Our variables are my function. Okay, now all my variables or my functions have been declared inside of my function. Nobody can see what's declared in here. Any variables I declared here, they're not going to be accessible outside, right? And we're not going to be overriding stepping on somebody else's function name, somebody else's variable names. Okay. But the only way that this would work is that if I deliberately call my function. Right? If I call my function, then everything inside of it happens. It occurs. Yes? Right? And that's fine. The problem is that I've made the problem smaller, but I've not entirely removed it. right? I am still declaring a function, my function, right? It could be that somebody else in some other library declared a my function function. Yeah, how unlucky would that be? But it could be, right? So to deal with this additional conundrum, what we do is that we use instead a anonymous function, a function that has no name, right? But if it has no name, how do I call it? I can't call it because it has no name, right? So what we're going to do is that, what we could do in JavaScript is that we can put this whole function inside of a parentheses as an expression, meaning the left-hand side, right, is an expression. And then I want that expression to be evaluated as a function. Right? I want it to be invoked. Right? And in JavaScript, the way you invoke functions is by putting a parentheses open and close on the right-hand side, just like that. Right? So this is an operator. It's an operator that says dynamically, oh, okay, you want to invoke. You mean you want me to interpret my left-hand side? You want me to interpret that as a function, right? And I will invoke it, right? I will call it, right? And this is all dynamic. On the left-hand side, we could make a mistake, and it's not a function; it's a string or a date, right? And this would fail, right? So dynamically, this operator evaluates the left-hand side as a function, and indeed, it is a function. That makes sense, right? So now this piece of code now behaves exactly the way it used to. So if I go back and I refresh, this still works. I can log in as Bob. Right? I can see Bob's profile, or I can still Alice and Alice, right? And I can refresh, and it still works the same way. Yes. So we have the same features that we had earlier, but now it has been protected. This design pattern is a very common design pattern of putting things in these kinds of modules, right? Self-contained little modules. It is referred to as a pattern as immediately invoked function expressions, or iifes, right? Immediately invoked function expressions. Everybody okay? Right? And we'll be using this all throughout the semester, right? You should not have any JavaScript files that you write yourselves that are not inside of an iife. Okay? Right? This introduces challenges, other challenges that we'll deal with it in a minute. Okay? Everybody okay? One of the challenges is that if it's not in the function, it's not viewable from the outside world. Well, how do I share data between different iifes? Right? And we'll deal with that next.